Hello. So I was interviewed by Taylor Debert about my forthcoming book, The Editors. And in case you don't know, Taylor is a journalist. He's based in DC. He has something like 4 or 5 books out, including a memoir that he wrote about his time in the Peace Corps. And he runs a series on Medium where he interviews the authors of books about what they're writing and their writing process and books and things like that. And I thought it was a really cool series. So I was really grateful that he interviewed me for it. But it's a text based interview. He and sends you the questions by email and he responds. So it's all written. And I asked him if he'd be comfortable if for my audience that prefers video, answer the same questions as video. And he said he was cool with it. So I thought I would, you know, shoot this video and answer the questions that he asked me. So, without further ado, these were the questions that Taylor Dibbert asked me about my book, The Editors. He said, "What does everyone need to know about your forthcoming book?" And I said that I'd want them to know the log line. So, the log line of The Editors, and in case you don't know, a log line is like the very short description of a book or a movie or a TV show. But the log line is a thriller inspired by Wikipedia. And I recognize that that might sound a little bit unusual to people because a lot of readers might wonder what's so thrilling about editing Wikipedia. It seems a little nerdy. People are clicking and typing keys and it seems a little bit more like busy work, right? Um, but I would challenge that view because to me, the Internet Encyclopedia has always seemed like the perfect setting to set a suspense novel, and I'll tell you why. This resource, Wikipedia, or Infopendium, as I call it in my book or in my novel, is something that we all are influenced by every day. Really, I mean, every Google search has Wikipedia results. Our AI chat engines, things like ChatGPT and Siri, they're feeding us information from Wikipedia. And so it really matters what facts are presented on this freely available information resource. And there's the influential side of things. On the other hand, you have countries like China that are opposed to the free exchange of information and have, taken steps to try to interfere with free internet websites like Wikipedia. And there's also the fact that it's anonymous. You don't know who the editors are, the people who work on this crowdsourced encyclopedia. They're literally just usernames. That's all you see when you look at the site. And that can be confusing for people at first because all you see is this username. You don't know who the person is behind it. And so I think those three things, to me, the influentialness and importantness of it, the fact that certain countries have different norms around free speech and they're trying to influence certain narratives in a certain way, and the fact that you don't know who the editors are, and this idea of unmasking them in the form of characters, that's what made it seem like a really fertile ground for a suspense novel, and I hope that readers feel the same. So Taylor also asked me a really good question about the spread of misinformation and disinformation in the United States, and asked if I'd highlight like 1 to 2 trends that I wanted readers to be aware of. And so I think that the thing that I'm most concerned about from a macro perspective is the lack of gatekeepers, because I don't know if we've really come to terms with it as a society, because for decades and decades, information would not be published and distributed unless it went through professional experts or largely would not be published or went through some sort of institutional gatekeeping. And we can talk about whether that gatekeeping is something, some people think good riddance to the gatekeeping, right? But the fact is, people can just post something now on social media or these different websites, and it doesn't have to go through a fact checking or vetting process before it gets published. That's just the internet, right? And it's actually been that way for a long time, but I still don't think we've fully come to terms with it, right? But Wikipedia, I would say, is an exception compared to other websites, and it's because editors can delete each other's content. If an editor is not following the rules, they're not following, aim for neutrality, we need better sources, and the policies as I described them in the novel, then another editor will come along and delete it, right? And so it's a different world. It's a different frame for a website. And I think that's is something that a lot of other internet platforms should consider, because it's just a different, it's arguably more effective. You can, certainly a lot of people are thinking that. And so I would say two trends that the average person might not be aware of is one, there has been a paradigm shift in the trustworthiness or popular perceptions of the trustworthiness of Wikipedia. What I mean by that is that when I was in high school, I had high school teachers who said, avoid Wikipedia like the plague, right? But now you have college professors who are saying, for a lot of sources or a lot of topics, the Wikipedia summary is actually pretty darn good. You have doctors that are saying it's good for their disease or their specialty. We have professors. I like this professor, John Nodden at Cambridge, who says, in a hysterical world, Wikipedia is the ray of light. And so, of course, it's always better to go to the underlying sources and to click through and read them as opposed to the encyclopedic summary. But there has been a paradigm shift in academia in terms of whether they think Wikipedia is credible in many cases. So the second thing I wanted people to know is that there are far, far fewer Wikipedia editors than people think there are. There are 1,500 active core contributors to English Wikipedia, which is the largest and most influential of the encyclopedias. But there are 1 billion monthly users on TikTok. So why is this? I think it's, editing Wikipedia, while it is free and it's something that anyone can do, very few people choose to take the initiative. And I think that also is yet another reason that characters, the characters in my novel are inspired by Wikipedia editors because I find them so interesting. These are the people who have stepped up, for better or worse, and say, hey, this is really important to me. The way that facts and information are presented on this particular website. So the question that I also had from Taylor is, how long did it take you to complete your manuscript? So before I started working on my novel manuscript, I was a journalist. I worked as a freelance journalist in addition to my corporate day job. And so I covered Wikipedia as a journalist since 2018. And I wrote for Slate, Washington Post, New York Times about the Wikipedia beat. And I'll make some other videos about what I learned covering Wikipedia as a journalist. But then in February 2020, I finally listened to the voice in the back of my head that said, it's a novel. It's a suspense novel because, there are 1,500 core contributors to Wikipedia. That's too many people to be in a nonfiction book about Wikipedia. But if I distilled and I, created composites and I identified the characters and, allowed sort of my subconscious to create, the characters, I was like, this is a realm where I could have the characters come into conflict on the internet, setting, and I thought it could be a really good suspense novel, right? But in February 2020, I wasn't sure what would be the central event that would bring all these characters together around the globe. Well, of course, then March of 2020 happened, and the pandemic, brought the U.S. after bringing other countries, it brought the U.S. to a halt, and we were suddenly in lockdown, and it was, one of the scariest and most interesting times of my life, certainly. And so I think that the pandemic not only inspired the book because it gave me a lot more time to write during lockdown, but it also inspired the book because I used that as a central event to bring the characters together and give them the same thing that they could write about and edit on the website in the book. And so the whole book itself takes place between December 2019 through May 2020. And and so the short answer is that I started writing the book in February 2020, and it is now coming out in August 2024. So it was a really long process. I could talk about that more too, the developmental editing process that it took to get this book out and make it the best it can be. So Taylor, he, like I said, he's an author himself, and he's really interested in people's writing routine. So this is a very detailed description of my writing routine. I really love waking up in the morning. I'm a morning person. Not everyone is, but that is when I am most receptive, most creative. And I try to, follow the motto of pay yourself first. And I really want to get my creative work done for the day. That's really rewarding for me. So I try to do it first before I check email or before I look at my phone, because that'll just take my attention down the wrong path. But it's hard. Sometimes I fail and I don't get right into the writing. So I make a cup of coffee and then I try to read something for about 15 minutes. I set a timer, actually a literal timer for 15 minutes, and I read a short story or a novel. and I'm looking for some sort of connection to what I'm writing that day. Sometimes there is, sometimes there isn't, but I think it's a good warm up or a tune up for my brain to get in the writing mood. And then I get into writing, and especially my first drafts, I really like handwriting, and it's just, I think handwriting is really important, especially for those of us who spend their day jobs in front of a computer. You want to have some sort of break, right? And allow a different part of your brain to activate. And I think that there's maybe even a more linguistic connection with your hand. I could go on a whole long thing about that, but I think that um, so I like handwriting, and I like doing it with Muji pens. I brought an example here. What I like about Muji pens is you can see when it's almost out of ink. Like this one is actually itself almost out of ink, and and it's just a really smooth gliding writing experience. I'm all about the point 0.5 Muji pen. It's a Japanese stationery brand, but I promise I'm not a secret Muji influencer or anything like that. Don't get any money for it. I just really like Muji pens, and I'd recommend that for anybody who thinks that handwriting would help them and give them a break from their writing or from their corporate computer job. So I try to spend about 1 to 2 hours in the morning, if I can, before going to work, writing. I'm not always able to get that. I know that not everyone will be able to get that. But for me, because I spent some time in a law firm, I think that the metric that I tend to use is time devoted to a project and not word counts like some authors do. So if I feel really good about, my progress for the day, even no matter how words I got down, if I was able to, devote 45 minutes or an hour or a certain amount of time to the writing. And so yeah, I think that 1 to 2 hours a day in the morning, if I can. Don't always get there. In fact, a lot of times I don't get there, but that's my goal. And it all starts with writing first thing in the morning and coffee, which I'm going to have a sip of right now just as a break. Okay, so not Noah, sorry, Taylor rather, had a follow up question about how did I go about getting the book published? And so back in 2020, when I was still writing the first draft, I came upon this notice for a contest that Inkshares was hosting. So Inkshares, in case you don't know, their model is they look at books that are selected by readers. And so for me, that meant putting a few chapters online, seeing what the reader reaction was. People were really into it. They people, I developed an audience of people who are interested in Wikipedia and sort of the digital humanities community. And, it was kind of putting it out as a test run and seeing, hey, would they be interested in buying this book in a few years when it's fully developed? And then the Inkshare storyboard also evaluated the submissions. So I think that, I was really thankful that Inkshares did the contest. Inkshares also, as a publisher, has been known to get its books adapted into film and TV adaptations. So, as an example, there's a show Palm Royale, which is based off the Inkshares book Mr. and Mrs. American Pie. So, I was really excited to get the publication deal with Inkshares, which I got in spring of 2021. But again, it took a developmental editing process over the course of a few years to really deepen the characters, fine tune the pacing, and just make this book, this lovely book, which I'm going to show you here, the very best it could be. So it was a long process. And then Taylor also asked if I was a regular reader of novels, and I am. I believe really very much in the Stephen King mantra that you have to read regularly to be a writer. Stephen King actually says that to be a good writer, you need to read and write about 4 hours a day. And like I said, I'm not able to get the whole 4 hours. I'm very lucky if I can get 2 in a day, but and even that I don't always hit, right? But I do enjoy reading novels, and it's so important to my creative work as well. And so, as an example, I reread rather, the novel The Circle when I was working on the editors. And it's a techno thriller. It's set on a Google campus. Gave me a lot of really good ideas of how to show how technology can have like visceral sort of sensory effects on whoever's interacting with it. And then I also recently read Lily Meyer's Short War. It's a novel that's set, and so she's a debut novelist. We're about the same age, and so I was excited to read her work. It's a novel that's set in the lead up to the Chilean Civil War, and I really encourage people, if there's a period of history that you don't know about, maybe read a historical novel set in that period. Because for me, I knew nothing about the Chilean Civil War, and I feel like it really helped give me a framework for what it was like during the 1970s and that military junta, which I I just really was very ignorant of. I didn't know very much about it at all. So, final question from Taylor. He said, "Do I have any big projects in the work?" And so I'm continuing my newsletter Source Notes. So I ran a column or wrote a column for Slate for a number of years called Source Notes. Now it's a newsletter for Substack, and it's about Wikipedia, books, AI, and everything in between. And I think that people who are really interested in this area of internet humanities, internet knowledge, and where are we going? What's the future of books and techno thrillers and the like? Will like the newsletter. So I encourage people to check it out. But also, I recently began working on my next novel, and I am the kind of writer, I don't like to tell, that much about my book before it actually comes out because it can take a long time, and I don't want to be too influenced too early in the process. But I can say at a high level, this book is about economics, and it's the main character is an economist, and so I'm really doing some research into the world of finance and banking. And I think sort of unlike some novelists see sort of like a very clear separation between nonfiction books and fiction. But actually, a lot of my favorite books, like Tom Wolfe and books written by Tom Wolfe, Bonfire of the Vanities, and others, they or those authors, they wrote deeply researched and reported fiction. And I think that that's something that we're sometimes missing these days. That we need to have contemporary fiction that feels contemporary, or that kind of mirrors sort of what we're experiencing in our lives, right? And so if there's something that I want to be known for, I think it's the fact that I want to write deeply reported, well-researched fiction. And I don't think that's a contradiction, because as William Faulkner said, the best fiction is far more true than any journalism. So again, thank you, Taylor, so much for the outstanding questions. Thanks also for letting me put them in a video. And again, for everybody, my novel, The Editors, comes out August 13th, and I can't wait to share this story with you.